Of all the watches that I've designed in my career, the most challenging ones to get right are the most simplistic ones. Dress watches are watches that require finesse and forces you to categorize every component, hone in on it, and execute to near perfection. It really is an ideal type of watch to work on from a design standpoint because it slows you down to get every measured millimeter just right. The beauty of working on the new Elem was that we had a great foundation to work with. The 2019 version of this watch already had some key design details that we wanted to carry over to the new version. This design exercise was really about taking it apart, refining each component, and putting it back together. The first order of business for the Elem was sizing it down to 38 millimeters from the previous size of 40 millimeters. For the type of watch we were creating, it was more size appropriate at 38. Plus, the trend in watches has noticeably come down in size. I think there's a certain room for expansion in the new Elem to have future iterations that are closer to 35 or 34 millimeters as well. The beauty of vintage dress watches of the past was that the bezel was thin and almost non-existent. So in order to create a similar type of visual, we kept the same dial opening diameter and brought the case size down to slim down the frame of the dial. We felt this was a balanced compromise to have a watch that wore comfortably on most wrist sizes, not too small and not too big. During the process of getting proportions right, I like to simplify the watch into basic lines to see how each edge, curvature, and surface interact with each other. When you look at the Elem top down, you start with the outside edge of the case, then approach the crystal and dial opening. Then finally, there are two additional invisible circles that had to be considered for a balanced design. The first inner circle is the point where the boxed crystal transitions from a curve to a flat surface, which is precisely where the outer edge of the indices sit right under it. This was intentional so that when you're looking at the watch straight on, you don't get any distortion of the indices from the curvature of the crystal. The second inner circle is the inside edge of the indices and how much negative space they occupy on the dial. This is an important measurement to look at because it determines the right amount of space that you want for the logo, script, and date window. A common practice you see in watches is the date frame lining up with the indices on the inside edge. But with the Elem, it creates a slight disturbance in a way that doesn't feel compositionally offensive. The linen dial is the star of the show with the Elem. As with any watch, I believe 90% of the attraction and what draws you in is the dial. That first read, first impression that your eyes have on the watch is crucial when it comes to a minimalistic watch, which is why we decided on featuring a linen dial on the Elem. The development of this texture took many rounds to get it just the way we wanted it. To be honest, we had never made something like this before, so we were unsure of where to even start. The first iteration was terrible. We basically scratched the dial surface in two directions to form a cross-hatched pattern, hoping that it would resemble a linen texture. That turned out horribly as the look was a little too uniform and it lacked depth too. The most important detail I was looking for was the pattern to be completely randomized and look organic. So what we ended up doing was going with a hydraulic stamping method that would achieve clear layers of depth. We took the tool and machined a bunch of lines of various weights, distances, and depth, virtually creating a pattern on an X, Y, and Z axis. When you couple that with a high-powered hydraulic stamping machine, the result is exactly what we were looking for. You have to observe the texture under a loupe or macro lens to fully appreciate what's happening. You'll notice all the different line weights and can actually see some lines going over and under each other like a woven pattern. It's really remarkable. With the satin dial finish on the surface, the depth of the texture changes in the light as well. The Elem dial is also curved down around the perimeter, which creates a soft inner glow around the edge that reflects a little light from the inner case wall. Without this, the dial would actually appear a little more flat, even with the texture. As much as I wanted to recreate a deep high pan shape like you would see in vintage watches, the movement underneath is a little bit too large for that kind of effect. Nonetheless, knowing that the dial has a shape to it adds to the romance and art behind the Elem. The indices on the original Elem were very minimal, but had a shape to it that was only noticeable under a loupe. So what we did this time around was add more noticeable visual appeal by designing a slightly wider set and adding more facets to the overall shape so that the light danced ever so subtly across the surface. The indices are delicate as it can easily overpower a dial, so there was a lot of consideration in getting the proportions just right with the length, width, and finishing. I like to view the space underneath the crystal and on the dial surface as kind of like interior design. The indices are like pieces of furniture that occupy the room, and just like in a real room, it takes a lot of consideration to get the right size and style to create a sound and balanced spatial layout. The articulation of the polished and brushed facets on each index provides just enough visual interest to draw you in. It's almost as if the dial is speaking to you. The hands on the Elem were a detail that we carried through from the original. The simplicity of the shape allows the hands to be legible across the dial and keep a level of peace and cleanliness on top of the textured dial surface. The minute and second hand do get a very small update where the tips are curved down to accommodate the underside of the boxed crystal. The benefit of curving the dial hands in crystal is that you end up with a very compact design where all the space inside is filled appropriately and you get a very slim watch overall. By curving the hands, you get the beautiful effect of the hands sweeping just underneath the crystal, as well as a very minimal inner case wall. The date complication oftentimes is one that's designed to be minimalized in sport watches. The wheel is often color matched to the dial and sometimes lack the presence of any date frame at all. With the minimal dial design of the Elem, and much like vintage watches, put a lot of effort into designing a beautiful date frame that had real dimension to it. The thin polished edge really defines the frame, while a nice, deep, beveled surface subtly draws your eyes to the date wheel. The King Seiko from the 70s is a great example of a well-made date frame, and I've always appreciated the attention to detail that was given to that part of the watch. When it comes to a dress watch, an important part that determines the comfortability of the wearing experience is the leather strap. For the Elem, it was important that the watch felt crisp but malleable right out of the box. So we decided to use Epson leather, which is a high-quality European leather that's often used in high-end handbags and leather goods by the likes of Hermes and other fashion houses. The benefit of Epson is that it holds up well over time due to its scratch-resistant surface. We also lined the back of the strap with Alcantara leather, usually seen in the interiors of sports cars due to its performance properties. It's naturally moisture-wicking and feels smooth and comfortable against the skin. As we did with the rest of the watch, the leather strap was highly considered in the choice of material and shape. The buckle is designed to fit flush against the leather and features dual finishing to really highlight the form. Of course, it wouldn't be a high-quality buckle without a solid tongue so that the overall fastening experience is secure and durable. Perhaps the most notable update to the Elem is the Sellita SW210 manual wind movement that sits inside the watch. There was a lot of deliberation between a self-winding automatic movement and your manual wind. And the reason why we landed on the SW210 was more about the experience than the performance. While sport watches are easy to throw on and seize the day, we wanted things to slow down when it came to the Elem. There's almost a forced interaction and relationship to form with a manual wind watch. Those 15 or so seconds it takes to wind the watch before putting it on is a short moment to appreciate the watch and perhaps discover something new every time you look at it. When you flip the watch over, you're greeted with the exceptionally finished movement. For as much attention we placed on the dial, we wanted to make sure the movement was just as beautiful, which is why we opted for a fully decorated main plate and bridge plate, including classic blue screws that accentuate the beauty of Swiss craftsmanship. The new iteration of the Elem embodies everything that Jack Mason is, a design-focused watch brand that is about raising the bar on every level. Putting thought and consideration into the wearing experience and the relationship that's formed with your watch is something that was on the forefront of our minds during the development of the Elem. A core value to us is to display our deep passion for design into everything we do on the watch itself, as well as the wearing experience. And I believe we accomplish just that.